From Aristotle to Instagram, persuasion has always been at the heart of human communication. But what exactly is rhetoric? And why does it matter just as much today as it did 2,000 years ago? Well, welcome back to Communication Campus. I'm your host, Dr. Melinda Stewart, and today we are exploring rhetoric, one of the oldest and most influential traditions in the field of communication. So, really, what we're thinking about is how classical thinkers defined rhetoric, the famous persuasive appeals, and how this ancient art continues to shape politics, law, advertising, and even everyday conversation. But before we can really get there, let's understand what this is and learn a little bit about where it came from. Now, most people know that rhetoric started with Aristotle in 4th century BCE. And for Aristotle, rhetoric is the faculty of observing any given case where the available means is persuasion. Then we have Plato, and Plato criticized rhetoric as flattery and was really concerned that it could be manipulative. Now, I don't know about you, but a lot of times when we think about the rhetoric that is used in today's day, it is a bit manipulative. So Plato wasn't really off. And then we have Cicero and Quintilian, and they're both Roman thinkers, and they saw rhetoric as central to public life and citizenship. So from the start, rhetoric has been both celebrated as an art within democracy and critiqued as a tool for manipulation. All these years later, we are still having the same conversation about the ways that rhetoric is used. Now, what we need to remember, and what I think almost all communication students know and gather and, are able to really easily process, are the three modes of persuasion. Now, first, we have ethos, or our credibility. And the speaker's character and trustworthiness are what are really key here. For example, a doctor giving health advice. Now, just any random person claiming to be a doctor isn't going to have that same credibility. Even myself, as a doctor, I shouldn't be giving every type of medical advice because I'm not that kind of doctor. But when I am talking about various things, about health communication, for example, those types of pieces of advice and the ways that we do persuade people and how we might get someone to change their behaviors by the way we're talking about it, okay, I do have credibility because I have been doing that kind of work for a really long time. What's important to remember about credibility is that even though I say I have all of these things that make me credible, it's really the audience that decides if I'm credible or not, if they're going to be persuaded by who I am or not. Next, we have pathos, and this is the emotional appeal. Now, when I was an undergrad, I remember learning that pathos is the pathetic one. And so it was really easy for me to remember that pathos is emotion because it's the weakest of the three, yet we use it probably the most often. Pathos is when we're appealing to someone's feelings and values. So, for example, we have a charity ad showing animals that are in need. And if you're like most people, you're immediately thinking of the Sarah McLachlan, the sad puppy videos. Even if you're younger, you probably have seen the sad puppy videos. And this is a great classic example of a pathos appeal, or, in my opinion, a pathetic appeal. And the reason that they don't work is because if you're just pulling on the emotions, you're probably going to get me to go, oh, I'm really sad about that. But is it enough for me to open up my wallet, call the 800 number, and give them my money? Probably not. All right, lastly, we have logos, which is easy to remember because it's the logical appeal. And this is where we're going to use reasoning, evidence, and facts. Now, I do have to say that one person's definition of effective evidence and facts are going to be different than possibly another person. So we gotta keep in mind that the word facts might not be agreed upon by everyone, but that's a whole other conversation. So, for example, here we have a lawyer. Lawyers are going to present legal precedents in a court. They're going to bring up evidence. They're going to bring up things that we are having to consider as facts of the case. Now, effective rhetoric often combines at least two, but the best is to have kind of all three to move an audience. But as I mentioned, if you're just relying on one, it's probably going to be pretty weak. And the weakest of all of them is pathos. So we got these basic pieces, right? And the whole idea is thinking about how we engage with the public and oftentimes how we persuade, how we move the audience. And this is why some of those other thinkers are like, hey, wait a minute. This could be used as manipulation because your whole goal is to move the audience, to get them to think a different way, speak a different way, do a different thing. So I kind of get where they're getting at when they've got these concerns. But there's some strategies and situations that we want to think about when it comes to how rhetoric works. Now, first, we have what is known as the rhetorical situation, and this is Bitzer's work in 1968. And Bitzer believed that every act of persuasion arises from the exigence or the problem, and an audience, the people listening, and the constraints. What's coming against what it is that's being said? What are the barriers? What are the things that are kind of pushing against this? So Bitzer believes that everything, again, really arises from this exigence. So there is a problem first, and then we look at the audience and what's constraining the modes of this discussion. We also have figures of speech that we need to take into consideration. And these are going to be the metaphors that we use, the repetition that we use, how we're using contrasts, tools that make rhetoric memorable. So these are part of the strategies. So we've got this rhetorical situation, and then we're going to start looking at the strategies that are used, these figures of speech that can be implied. And then we also think about what Aristotle said about genres of rhetoric. And this is kind of honestly one of my favorite parts in learning about rhetoric was these different genres, these different types, categories, if you will. So first we have deliberative rhetoric. And this is when we are thinking about future action, i.e., politics. So deliberative, I am being deliberative in what it is that I'm saying. I am trying to move you to do a thing. Then we have forensic rhetoric, and this is going to be very justice focused. We're going to see this, again, we're seeking that movement in the courtroom. I am trying to persuade you that my client is guilty or that my client is innocent, depending on what side of the courtroom we're talking about. Nextly, we have epidictic. And epidictic rhetoric is praise and blame. So we might think about ceremonies or speeches. And in these cases, we are celebrating in some ways. In other times, we are gathering the people together to blame that other person, that other organization for doing a thing. We see a lot of this in the news world today. So we can see When anyone gets up to give a speech, are they praising people? Are they blaming people? Are they trying to get you to get involved in something, to vote a certain way, to buy a certain thing? All of those different categories can be put into one of these genres of rhetoric. But rhetoric isn't just about speeches in ancient Greece. It's literally everywhere. As I've mentioned, a lot of political campaigns rely on ethos, pathos, and logos. Advertisers are going to use rhetorical appeals to shape customer choices. Social media influencers are going to craft ethos and pathos to persuade their followers. So whether we're realizing it or not, we are all consumers and producers of rhetoric. Okay, so to sum this all up, I do think this is one of the easier ones. I think that might be because it's the one we've all talked about in probably every communication class you've ever taken. So it's probably something you are the most familiar with. But there are elements of this that I don't know that you've always heard about. So I hope you dive into those other areas a little bit more. But in general, to sum it up, rhetoric is an art of persuasion. It has deep, deep roots in classical thought. Aristotle's appeals of logos, pathos, and ethos remain extremely powerful even today. And understanding rhetoric is going to help us better communicate, especially when we are thinking about the more critical audiences. How am I going to move them? How am I going to get them to even give me that sense of credibility? Thank you for joining me in this episode of Communication Campus. In our next episode, we're going to continue looking at rhetoric and look at dramatism. This is just another foundational perspective in communication. But until then, remember, persuasion is absolutely everywhere, and rhetoric helps us see how it works. Keep communicating.